Hi guys, welcome to the last live of Writing Fundamental series. I am so sorry. I was supposed to take this live yesterday, but I was not feeling too well. That's why then I had to postpone it. I'm so sorry. Some construction work is going on above the flat that is in the above flat. So there might be some background noise in the video. I'm sorry for that. I'll try and stop talking when that drill is going on. But let's see how, because it wasn't actually going on. It has just started. The moment I started the live, they went live. So I'm sorry for that. Let me just get my document here and we'll begin our session. See, okay. Okay. Uh, just to give you a heads up, I'm not feeling too well today as well. So I might just stop and take a break in between in case if I feel like my throat is giving out or if I don't feel well. So just bear with me. I'm just gonna try and finish the session today as soon as possible so that um, we can put an end, a closure, we get a closure for this series because this series is just so important for new writers. So I really want to finish the series and then, maybe begin another one. But I'll be doing that on Verbatic Media's channel and not this channel because I'm kind of shifting content from my channel that is on writing to Verbatic Media's channel. So we'll see about that. Anyway, let's begin with today's session. The Writer's Toolkit. Let me just give you all a quick introduction about myself. I am an award-winning author. I have written 2 books. I'll be telling you about it, both of them in a minute. I'm a developmental editor for over a decade now. I am a creative writing coach. Writing is my passion, and teaching is one of the things that I really enjoy. And so I combine both the passions, and it turned out I was very good at teaching writing. So I also teach writing. I am also a publishing consultant, which is quite evident because I've spent just so much time in the publishing industry, almost 12 years this year. So uh, because of that, I founded Verbatic Media. Verbatic Media is my own company, and I am starting self-publishing for other authors from this year, 2026. So in case if you're looking for a self-publishing platform, do consider Verbatic Media. I'm also the founder of The Reading Bud. It is a book blog. It is a very old book blog and a very popular one. And it is for the love of books that I have because I just read too much to not to be reviewing books. I'm also a cat mom to a lot of cats because I'm a cat rescuer and a cat foster. I'm also an animal activist and I'm a psychology aficionado and a philosophy junkie. All in all, I love everything that's related either to mind or literature or both. So this is who I am, and these are the books that I've published. Deceived is a psychological thriller, and The Manor is a gothic horror novel. I'm just gonna skip to uh, the next slide because I really want to get this session started. The Art of Storytelling was supposed to be coming out in February 2026, but is now going to come out in July because I have just been so busy with work and I do not want to get this book out before I have already kind of have tied up with a couple of universities and schools because I really want to get this book out there in the physical world. So I really need to have those tie-ups and the library tie-ups before I go ahead with publishing this book. I'm doing it with Verbatic Media, so it's entirely in my hand when I publish it. So the manuscript is ready, everything is ready. I'm just waiting for the tie-ups to get over. And the moment they are, June or July is what we are looking at for the final release of The Art of Storytelling. In the meantime, you can totally pre-book the book. I'm not taking money at all from anyone. I'm just kind of having everyone fill out the forms so that I know how many books I have to send out before even I publish the book. So this is what you'll find in The Art of Storytelling. There are a lot of trademark methods that I've added in the book, which I'll be using for my workshops later on then. So this book is going to be kind of a guide that I'll be using for my own workshops. Just give me 1 second. It's my cat, Danny. Anyway, so this is The Art of Storytelling, which you can pre-book on my website, www.verbaticmedia.com. And then we have today's session, Writing Fundamentals, episode number 10, The Writer's Toolkit. Now, so first of all, I would like to welcome everyone to the last life of the Writing Fundamental series. It's honestly been such a lovely journey doing these sessions with all of you. We've spoken about structure, characters, conflict, dialogue, scenes, and prose rhythm. And basically, all the craft tools you need to write a book. But today's session is slightly different. Today, we are not talking about how stories work. We are going to be talking about how writers work. Because here's something that I have realized after working with hundreds of authors and writers over the years from all over the world, both as an editor and a writer myself. Most people who want to write a book do not fail because they lack talent. They fail because they lack systems. And this is something that nobody really talks about when we discuss writing. And this people talk about creativity, people talk about inspiration, people talk about brilliant ideas, but very few very few people talk about the daily mechanics of being a writer. That is the habits, the routines, and the discipline. And also the emotional struggles, things like perfectionism or procrastination and the self doubt that plagues us. So today's life is essentially going to be about building what I call the writer's toolkit. It is not the craft tools. Just give me a second. So these are not the craft tools, as I said, but they are life tools that help you actually finish a book. Because writing a book is not a one moment, one second. Because writing a book is not one moment of brilliance, it is hundreds of small writing sessions. One paragraph, one page, one scene, over and over again until eventually you have a manuscript. Now, let me tell you something about writers that may surprise you. Most professional writers are actually extremely boring people when it comes to their routines. And I mean that in the best possible way. They're not waiting around for inspiration. They're not sitting dramatically by the window waiting for the muse. No. They are doing something much simpler. They are showing up again and again and again. And the interesting thing is that when you start studying famous writers, you begin to see a pattern. They all have very strong rituals around writing. For example, Stephen King is famous for writing every single day. Even on holidays, even on his birthday, I think he takes only 1 day off, as mentioned in his memoir, come nonfiction on the craft of writing, on writing. So he takes only 1 day off, and that is on Christmas. So he sits down in the morning and writes around 2,000 words every single day. And he has said something very interesting about this. He says, amateurs sit and wait for inspiration, while the rest of us just get up and go to work. That's such a powerful line because it tells you that writing at a professional level is not treated as a magical activity. It is actually treated as a job. Now, I know this might be a little bit disappointing to many writers who have this romanticized idea in their head about writing, but writing has to be done just as a job has to be done. Now, let's talk about Dan Brown. I know there's so many fans of Dan Brown out there, the author of the Da Vinci Code. Um, he has an even more unusual writing ritual. He wakes up at around 4 a.m. He writes for a few hours, and then every hour he actually stops and does push ups and stretches. He does this because he believes it keeps his brain active and prevents mental fatigue. Imagine that. The man who wrote one of the biggest thrillers in the publishing history is literally doing push ups between writing sessions. That is discipline. Now, then there's Margaret Atwood, who has a very different approach. I was actually reading a book by Margaret Atwood just recently. I'm actually still left with last 50, 60 pages of the book. It is uh, on writers and writing, I think. I'm forgetting the name. It is by Margaret Atwood, in which it tells that she wakes up and the first thing that she has in the morning is basically a Diet Coke and a cigarette. I think, if I'm not wrong, that's what it said, or something like it. So she has a very different kind of a writing routine. She writes in the morning as well, usually starting around 9 a.m., and she writes for a few hours before lunch. But what she emphasizes most is protecting the writing time. It doesn't matter if you write in the morning, if you write in the evening, if you write in the afternoon, or in the late night. What is more important is protecting that time. There should be no distractions, no meetings, no emails, no calls, because that time belongs only to your manuscript or your book. I'm sorry if my voice is a bit low, but this is the maximum that I can talk today because my throat is a bit short. And when you look at all these writers, Stephen King, Dan Brown, Margaret Atwood, the interesting thing is that their routines are all different, but the principle is the same. They treat writing as a daily practice, not as a rare event. Now, let me give you my own example as well, because I do write a lot. Most of you already know this about me. I wake up at 5 a.m., mostly 4:30 a.m. And that early morning time is my writing time. Now, why? Because the entire world around me is quiet. My entire house is quiet. I live in a house with so many cats, and they all are sleeping at that time. There are no phone calls, no emails, there are no WhatsApp messages, there is no client work because I do not begin it unless I've gotten my daily quota of words or scenes written. It's just me and my manuscript. And those early hours are incredibly important for my writing because my brain is still in that slightly dream-like state, which really helps me a lot in getting into the writing state very quickly. And it's very close to imagination. So that's why a lot of writers actually prefer writing either very early in the morning or very late at night. Those are the hours when creativity flows very easily. Now, here's the important thing. You don't have to wake up at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 4:30 a.m. in the morning every day. You don't have to copy Stephen King. You don't have to copy Dan Brown or Margaret Atwood. What you need to do is build your own system because writing a book is not about one burst of creativity or a couple of bursts of creativity. It is about creating a structure in your life that supports writing. And that's what we are going to talk about today. We are going to talk about writing habits. Sorry, I have a habit of raising my finger from the tiniest one. Writing habits, writing routines, and how to defeat the biggest enemy of writers, that is procrastination. Because, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Perfectionism. I was actually so confused between if I should cover procrastination or perfectionism. Perfectionism is responsible for more unfinished manuscript than anything else in the world. So think of today's session as assembling your writer's toolkit. By the end of this life, you should have a realistic writing habit, a simple writing routine, and strategies to keep writing even when your brain tells you that your work is terrible. Which, by the way, your brain will definitely say at some point, because that's part of the process. Even professional writers go through that. Let's go to the second session. Writing habit, the real foundation of finishing a book. I'll just take a second's break for drinking my tea. Great. So let's talk about the first and the most important tool in the writer's toolkit, and that is writing habits. Because here is the most unfortunate and uncomfortable truth about writing a book. Most people don't fail because their idea wasn't good. Most people fail because they never developed a habit of writing regularly. They write when they feel inspired. They write when they suddenly have free time, or they write when the mood feels right. But writing a book cannot depend on mood because moods are unreliable. Some days you will feel creative, some days you will feel tired, and some days you will hate your own writing. And on those days, the only thing that keeps the book moving forward is a writing habit. Now, when we talk about habits, I want to start with a very simple shift in mindset. Instead of asking yourself, when will I feel inspired to write? Ask yourself this: when will I sit down to write? Those two questions sound similar, but they lead to completely different lives as a writer. The first question depends on emotion, while the second one creates discipline. Now, let's look at some famous writers again because their habits are very interesting. We already spoke about Stephen King and how he writes 2,000 words a day, every single day. How he does that is that he sits down to write in the morning in his study and he doesn't leave the desk until those words are done. In fact, in on writing the memoir, he has even gone on to tell that he has told his wife to not to give him food unless he's written for the day, or written, I think, 4 pages he writes, or the 2,000 words. So he's very clear about it. He's told his family about it, he's told his wife about it, and so he gets that extra support. Now imagine that 2,000 words every single day. That means in about 3 months, he has a full draft of a novel, which he anyway suggests that you should not be taking more than 3 months or a season's time, that is 3 or 4 months, to write the first draft of a novel. If you take more than that, it is going to be very difficult. So try and finish it in the first 3, 4 months only, and then begin revising it. Now, Stephen King can write a novel, the first draft of a novel, in 3 months. Not just because he's a genius, which he obviously is, but because he is consistent. He's very consistent. In fact, he's one of the most consistent writers I've ever seen or heard of in the writing community. So much that he is 75 plus, but he is still publishing at least one book every year. Another fascinating example is of Haruki Murakami, the Japanese novelist. His routine is almost athletic. When he is working on a novel, this is how his schedule looks like. He wakes up at 4 a.m., he writes for 5 to 6 hours straight. Then he goes for a 10-kilometer run or a swim. Then he reads, listens to music, and sleeps early. And he repeats this routine every single day for months when he's working on a novel. Murakami once said something about writing a novel is not just an artistic activity, it is also a physical discipline. Sorry. Sorry. Because you need stamina, just like a marathon runner. Because writing a novel requires sitting down and working on something for months or even years. Now, of course, most of us are not going to run 10 kilometers every time after finishing a writing session. But the point here is not the exact routine. The point is consistency. Let me give you a very simple way to think about writing habits. There are two types of writers: burst writers and steady writers. Burst writers write a lot in one day, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 words in one sitting, and then they disappear for 2 weeks. Then again, they write a lot, then again, nothing. This feels productive in the moment, but it usually leads to unfinished manuscripts because the story keeps losing momentum, which is very important for completing a book. On the other hand, steady writers are different. They may write 300 to 500 words a day, but they do it every day. And over time, those small numbers become very important. Let's do the math. Even if you write 300 words a day, in 1 month, you will have about 9,000 words. And in about 6 months, you'll have 54,000 words. That's not bad because writing 300 words would actually just take 15 to 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, maybe 1 hour if you're really new to writing. But I'll tell you what, 300 words is quite literally nothing. But even if you stick to writing 300 words every single day, you'll have a complete draft in 6 months. What I suggest is writing at least 500 to 600 words every single day, and combining it with the burst writing. That is whenever you are feeling this amazing and insane burst of writing inspiration, do not stop yourself. Do not stop yourself from writing and write those 5,000, 6,000 words. And you know what? You're going to have a finished first draft, or maybe the draft that you're working on, whatever that draft is, in about 4 to 5 months. So now that 54 to 60,000 words is a big novel. And the reason that works is because writing habits create something extremely important. They create momentum. The story stays alive in your mind, the characters stay fresh, and the world you are building doesn't fade away, which is the problem with most of the writers who are not able to finish their books. They stay away from the writing for so long that they kind of forget what was going on in the story. Some writers work better at night. Some people write during lunch breaks. Some people write late after the house is quiet. The key is not the timing. The key is protecting that writing window. Because if writing time is flexible, something else will always take its place. Maybe the emails, Netflix, scrolling, work, life will fill that space immediately, which is why professional writers treat their writing time as non negotiable. And that is something that you'll also have to start doing if you want to finish that book. Now, there is another trick that helps build writing habits, and that is lowering the entry barrier. A lot of writers struggle because they start the day with a very heavy expectation. They sit down and think, today I must write an amazing chapter. And that pressure immediately creates resistance because your brain starts saying, suddenly writing feels difficult before you've even started. So instead, try something much simpler. Tell yourself, today I will just write one paragraph. That's it, one paragraph. Once you start writing, you'll often realize that the resistance disappears. You write the paragraph, then another one, and then maybe go on to fill the entire page. But the key was simply starting. And that low threshold is going to help you get started. Another habit that many writers use is setting very clear writing targets. For example, 300 words a day, 500 words a day, one scene per session, 20 minutes of writing, whatever suits you. These targets are small enough that they feel achievable. And when you keep on hitting them regularly, you begin to see yourself as a proper writer. Not someone who wants to write, but someone who writes regularly. And trust me when I say identity matters, because once writing becomes a part of your identity, you naturally protect that time. So, if you remember only one thing from this session, let it be this: books are not written through inspiration only, they are written through habits. Small sessions repeated consistently until the manuscript slowly grows, page by page, scene by scene. Now, let us move on to the next section, that is writing routines. So, now we've spoken about writing habits. That is the idea of showing up regularly. But here's where many writers still get stuck. They sit down to write, they open the laptop, they look at the document, and suddenly their mind goes blank. Or worse, they start rereading what they wrote yesterday. And then they start editing. Then they start fixing grammar. Then they rewrite the same paragraph 15 times. And by the end of the writing session, nothing new has been written. This is extremely common and it happens because writers do not have a writing routine. They have a writing time, but they don't have a system for the writing session itself. So let's talk about that because professional writers actually follow very simple routines that make writing sessions much easier. First, let me tell you about a very famous writing trick used by Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway used to stop writing in the middle of a sentence. Now, that sounds strange, but there was a reason for it. When he stopped mid sentence, he already knew exactly how the sentence would continue the next day. So when he sat down to write the next morning, he didn't face that terrifying blank page. He simply finished the sentence. And once the sentence was finished, the paragraph continued, then the scene continued, and the writing flowed naturally. This is a brilliant psychological trick, especially when you get intimidated by the blank page. Because the hardest part of writing is often starting. But once you start, the brain warms up and the story begins moving again. Another fascinating rule comes from Neil Gaiman, the author of American Gods and Coraline. Neil Gaiman gives himself two choices when he sits down to write. He says, you can't write, you can write or you can do nothing. That's it. No internet, no phone, no social media, no reading, no distractions. You can either write or stare at the wall. Eventually, the brain becomes bored enough that writing becomes the more interesting option. It's a very clever way to remove distractions. So, let's now talk about a simple writing routine that you can use every time you sit down to write. I like to think of it as the 4-step writing session. This helps the brain transition into storytelling mode. Step number 1, warm up your brain. It's going to take just 5 minutes of your time. Before you start writing new material, spend a few minutes reconnecting with the story. You can do simple things like reread the last page you wrote yesterday, but without making any revisions, or look at your outline or the scene notes. This is something that I do because I create a lot of scene notes and the outline notes. And so I look at them. I actually kind of prepare. For example, if I'm finishing off my session today, so I obviously have some more ideas regarding the next scene. So what I do is I take a little sticky notepad and write a couple of ideas and kind of stick it on the page that I'm supposed to be opening tomorrow in my physical notebook. The next day, when I start my session, I open my notebook, read those notes, and then begin writing on my laptop. So I have the notes for tomorrow. This is something that is very, very useful. Or you can write a few rough thoughts about what happens next, generally in the document only. This is like stretching before exercise. You are preparing the mind to enter the story world again. Without this warm up, the brain often feels disconnected from the narrative. Step number two, draft without editing. Now comes the most important rule of writing. And this is where many writers sabotage themselves. When you are drafting, you do not edit. And trust me, you can do it. I do it as an editor. I'm a writer as well as an editor. But when I write, I do not let my editing brain take over at all. I just keep on making mistakes, sometimes intentionally. And then, that's how you learn to override the editing part of your mind. So when you are drafting, do not edit. Not sentences, not grammar, not word choices, nothing. Your only job during drafting is the forward momentum. You just keep on going ahead, ahead. Do not look back, just go ahead. Keep on writing because editing activates a completely different part of your brain. Editing is analytical and writing is imaginative, and you do not want to be switching back and forth from those two states of mind. When you try to do both at the same time, they will cancel each other out. And that's when writers get stuck rewriting the same paragraph for 30 minutes. So during drafting, allow yourself to write imperfect sentences, write clumsy sentences, write awkward dialogue. It's okay. That's what the editing stage is for, or the revisions are for. Now, let me share a quick example from my own process. Sometimes when I'm writing a scene and I realize I need to research something, maybe a historical detail or a location detail or a character um, personality trait detail, I don't stop the writing session. Instead, I write a note in brackets. I use a lot of square brackets, and you can too. So I would write something like, I'll open the square brackets and I'll write check historical reference here, or describe the market atmosphere here, or describe a little personality trait here. And then I continue writing. Because if you stop to research every small thing, the writing session will lose its momentum. And momentum is everything when it comes to writing a story, especially fiction. Step number 3, mark problems instead of solving them. This step is extremely important and is kind of related to the earlier step. When you hit a difficult moment in the story, maybe a scene transition or a piece of dialogue, your instinct will be to stop and fix it. Maybe you need to try and remember some detail or something like that. But that often slows down the entire writing session, and you wouldn't want to do that. So instead, do something very simple. Again, leave yourself a marker. You can write something like improve this conversation, maybe highlight it, or again, put it in square brackets. Write, expand the scene, or maybe add a comment, expand the scene, add emotional reaction here, add some detail there, and then continue writing. Think of the first draft as a rough sculpture. You are shaping the overall form, the fine details will come later. Step number 4, leave yourself a path for tomorrow. Now, this is one of my most recommended writing tricks to the people who have the blank page syndrome, as I call it, or the fear of the blank page. Before ending your writing session, leave yourself a note for the next day. Something like next scene is Leela discovers the hidden corridor near the staircase. Or the next scene is going to be confrontation between X and Y characters. This makes the next writing session very easy because when you sit down the next day, you already know where the story goes next. And that removes a lot of hesitation. So, when you combine these 4 steps, your writing session becomes much smoother. So, warm up your brain, draft without editing, mark problems for later, and leave a note for tomorrow. This creates a repeatable system. And systems are incredibly powerful because they reduce decision making. You're no longer wondering, how should I begin today? You simply follow the routine, and once the brain gets used to that structure, writing becomes much, much easier. Yes. Now we come to the next topic. Every writer's greatest enemy, perfectionism. Now we come to what I believe is the biggest obstacle most writers face, and that is perfectionism. Not lack of ideas, not lack of talent, not lack of time, but it is perfectionism. One of my cats just went from there because the AC was getting too cold. Okay, it feels like something positive, perfectionism. Uh, but trust me, it's very deceptive. It feels like I just want the writing to be good, right? And that sounds perfectly reasonable. But in reality, perfectionism often becomes the reason Why, reason writers stop writing altogether. Let me describe a situation that many of you will probably recognize. You sit down to write a scene, you write a paragraph, then you read it again, and your brain immediately says, "This sounds terrible." So you rewrite the paragraph, then you read it again. Now your brain says the dialogue sounds unnatural. So you rewrite the dialogue, then you read the whole page again, and suddenly nothing feels good enough. And after an hour of writing, you still have the same paragraph. Maybe even worse than before. Does this sound familiar? This is perfectionism in action, and it's incredibly dangerous because it kills momentum. One of the biggest misconceptions writers have is this: they believe that good writers produce beautiful first drafts. But that is simply not true. In fact, many writers, many famous writers, have spoken openly about how messy their first drafts are. Anne Lamott, a well known writing teacher and author, has a very famous phrase for this. She calls first drafts as shitty first drafts. That is actually the title of one of her essays as well. And what she means by that is very simple. The first draft is not meant to be good. It is not meant to be polished or elegant or perfect. Its only job is to exist. As Terry Pratchett says, it's just you telling the story to yourself. Another writer who speaks about this very honestly is Neil Gaiman. He once said something that I absolutely love. He said, "The process of doing your second draft is making it look like you knew what you were doing all along." Think about that for a moment. The second draft is where the magic happens. The first draft is just the raw material. This is something I've also seen constantly while working as an editor. Writers sometimes send me a manuscript and apologize in advance. They say things like, "This is very rough, this is very messy, this is probably terrible." And I always tell them the same thing. That's perfectly normal because writing a novel is not like building a finished sculpture immediately. It's more like digging clay out of the ground. First, you gather the clay, then you shape it, then you refine it, then you polish it. But if you never gather the clay in the first place, there is nothing to shape. And that's the real danger of perfectionism. Perfectionism convinces writers that they must produce beautiful writing immediately. But storytelling doesn't work like that. Stories evolve, characters evolve, scenes improve. And many of the most powerful moments in the book only emerge after multiple revisions. Let me give you a very practical way to think about drafts. When you're writing a novel, you are usually going through three different stages. The first draft is discovery. You are discovering the story. You are discovering the characters. You are discovering the emotional arc. The draft is messy, and that's completely fine. Then comes the second stage, that is the second draft, which is structure. Now you start shaping the story. You improve the pacing, you apply the story structure, you deepen the characters, you strengthen the conflict. This is where the novel begins to look more intentional and more like a book. Then comes the third stage, that is the third draft, which is refinement. Now you polish the language, the dialogue, and you remove the repetition. You tighten the scenes. This is where the writing becomes good. But if you try to jump directly to stage three while still writing the first draft, the story never moves forward because it doesn't get discovered completely. And that's exactly what perfectionism does. It traps writers in endless polishing of unfinished drafts. So let me give you a very powerful rule that many writers follow: draft first, edit later. Separate the two processes completely. When you are drafting, your job is speed and momentum. When you are editing, your job is precision and tightening. But never mix the two. Another very helpful trick is something I call permission to be imperfect. When you sit down to write, remind yourself repeatedly, this is only the first draft. Whenever you make a mistake, instead of going back, deleting and improving or correcting it, you need to tell yourself, this is only the first draft. I'm going to take care of it in the next draft. And move on. You're not writing the final book yet, you are simply creating the raw version. Even professional writers do this. In fact, many famous authors don't even allow themselves to reread what they wrote the previous day. They just keep moving forward. That is actually a very good thing you can do because they know the real improvement happens during revision. Let me share something reassuring as well. Every writer at some point thinks their writing is terrible, even experienced writers. even best-selling authors. There is always a moment during the writing process where you think this book is not working, the scene is bad, or maybe I'm not a good writer at all. Those thoughts are extremely common. They are not a sign that your writing is bad. They are a sign that you are deep inside the creative process. So the real skill writers must learn is not to be perfect. It is to be persistent. The ability to keep writing even when the voice in your head says, this is not good enough. Because that voice appears for everyone. And it also appears while you're doing other things, if I'm not wrong. The writers who finish books are simply the ones who keep going anyway. Now, let's put the entire toolkit together. Let's bring everything together. Today, we've spoken about habits, routines, and perfectionism. And if you really think about it, those three things are what actually determine whether somebody finishes a book or not. Because ideas are everywhere. Trust me when I tell you, almost everyone has a story idea. But finishing a book requires something more. It requires system. And that's what we are calling to, and that's why we are calling today the writer's toolkit. Not tools like grammar or plot structure. We've already learned about them. But the tools that help you actually sustain a writing life. So let's summarize the toolkit into 5 essential tools every writer needs. Tool number 1, a writing habit. The first tool is simple, a writing habit. You decide when you write. Maybe it's early morning, maybe it's late at night, maybe it's during lunch breaks, maybe it's just 20 minutes every day. The timing doesn't matter, the consistency matters. Because books are written through repetition of small sessions again and again until the manuscript is complete. Tool number 2, a writing routine. The second tool is writing routine. That is, what do you do when you sit down to write? You know, you now know the structure. Warm up the brain, draft without editing, mark problems for later, and leave a note for tomorrow. This routine removes friction. So use it. You're not staring at a blank page anymore if you're using my structure, wondering where to begin. You simply follow the system. Tool number 3, scene thinking. This is important. This is something that helps many writers tremendously, and I personally use it as well. Instead of thinking I have to write a whole chapter today, think I'm writing one scene. Always go scene wise. The entire novel is actually plotted scene wise. Stories are built through scenes, maybe a conversation, a confrontation, a discovery, a turning point. It can be anything. When you focus on writing one scene at a time, the task becomes much more manageable. And gradually, those scenes connect into chapters, and chapters connect into acts, and acts connect into a full novel. Tool number 4, drafting discipline. This tool is extremely important. The discipline to move forward even when the writing is imperfect. Remember the rule, draft first, edit later. Your first draft is not the final book, it is simply the foundation. Once the foundation exists, you can strengthen it. But without a first draft, there is nothing to improve. There's no foundation to build a house on. Tool number 5, emotional resilience. This is very important. It is perhaps the most important tool of all. Writing is a very strange creative activity because most of the time you're working alone. You don't always know if the scene is working. You don't always know if the story will come together. Sometimes you will feel confident. Sometimes you will feel completely lost. And that's normal. Every writer goes through that, and you need to keep on telling yourself this again and again. The real skill is learning to keep going or keep writing anyway. Believe in yourself, believe in your story. And this brings us to the end of today's session. I want to leave you with one thought before we end today's session. Just give me 1 second. There is a very big difference between two kinds of people who want to write a book and people who become authors. The difference between them is surprisingly simple. One group keeps waiting for the perfect moment, the other group simply keeps writing. Even when the day is busy, even when the world feels clumsy, even when they are unsure where the story is going, they keep showing up. And slowly, page by page, the book takes shape. And that is how every book you have ever read was written. Not through one magical moment, but through hundreds of ordinary writing sessions. One paragraph, one page, one scene at a time until eventually you have a manuscript. And with that, we've come to the end of the Writing Fundamentals series. Over the past sessions, we've explored story structure, characters, conflict, dialogue, scenes, prose rhythm, and now the writer's toolkit. My hope is that these sessions have not only given you knowledge, but also confidence. Because writing is not something reserved for a special group of people, it is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with practice and persistence. So before we end today's session, I want to ask you one question. Not about your story idea, not about the genre that you're writing in, but about the next step. When will you write next? Don't tell me someday. Not and don't tell me when the inspiration strikes. But specifically tell me when you are going to write next time. When is your next time? Tomorrow? Tomorrow morning? Tomorrow evening? Tomorrow afternoon? Tonight? This weekend? Because writing begins with one decision. The decision is to sit and write. Remember, the difference between someone who wants to write a book and someone who does write a book and become an author is simple. One waits while the other one keeps writing.